He's been described as a cross between Patricia Cornwell and John D. McDonald, and I'm not really sure where to go with that cross. But before these two ever crossed paths, Ridley, you went to college to study medicine.
I did. I started out in pre-med. That didn't last long, but I did start out in pre-med.
And then when you left pre-med, you didn't go on to writing exactly. You went on to...
I tried to be James Taylor for 10 years. I should have stopped after 10 weeks, but I didn't know.
But you were writing music for your band.
I was. I wrote music for a band, a number of bands, and traveled around the country, and actually a few years into that realized what a sort of lost life it is, and started writing. The great thing about music as an occupation is you can do it at night, so I would write 6 to 7 hours a day and play music at night, and I did that for 8.5 years before I finally was published, so it was a long dry spell. For those of you trying to get published, don't quit. It took 8.5 years to get my first book published, and when it was published, I got enough money to buy a microwave oven. If you compute the hours versus the income, it was fractions of a cent an hour.
Okay, so since you didn't initially have the aspirations to be writing, you were first in medical school, and then you wanted to...
I'm going to turn your mic up, hang on.
Okay, did you, recently...
What's going to fool? Oh, sorry.
Should we let him keep going? You did have one
By
of
the
your...
way, I should just say that there's absolutely no reason for me to be the guest of honor. If I may point that out, there's a million great writers here, and when I realized I just wasn't on a panel, I was actually being interviewed as a guest of honor, I thought, that can only mean that they think I'm really old.
Well, you had an album re-released from your music years.
I did, yeah. I mean, I didn't have to re-release, but somebody did re-release it to, sold 6 more copies. The album that was re-released was called Big Lost Rainbow. Our band was called Big Lost. We had 2 acoustic guitars, an electric bass, a cello, and a flute, and all 5 of us sang, and I wrote all the songs. It was, eclectic to beat the band. And we traveled around the country and played at colleges and bars, and it was literally the 10 best years of my life. I just had so much fun. We had a 66-passenger Bluebird bus that we tore all the insides out of and built so that 5 of us could sleep in it. And we even had a wood-burning stove in it. And we would use the wood-burning stove going down the highway. And we didn't realize, we'd done this for about 3 or 4 years until one day we were pulled over in Connecticut, and the law officer walking in our bus said, this isn't legal to have burning fuels inside a vehicle. We said, really? We've been doing this forever. So we had a little stack of wood in there, and the whole thing. He must have, looking back on that, he must have thought we were really out there. He was right.
So you went from writing music to writing thrillers?
I did. I mean, I was a big reader, and I had read all of John D. McDonald, and just absolutely loved that world of Travis McGee and all the other standalones he wrote. And I read Ken Follett's early work and really loved it, and Robert Ludlum's early work and really loved it. And it was actually, I'm trying to think of who it was, I always forget his name. I'm going to go blank because I am getting old. But it was a different writer actually that inspired my whole sort of attempt to write. But at some point, I had loved writing in school. And I had started writing when I was 10 years old. I had started writing short stories when I was 10. And I think I went back to that as kind of a safe place to be. I was trying to write Columbo and Quincy scripts. That's what I spent those early years trying to do. And I didn't get any of them produced, but this is the importance of all of us. I got a mentor. I got a guy named Stan Silverman, who had been the head writer for a show called Sea Hunt, which some of you may remember if you're as old as I am. And I loved Sea Hunt, and this guy named Stan Silverman, through a friend of a friend, read one of my scripts and said, it's not that good, but you might be that good if you worked at it. And I said, I'd love to work at it, and Stan mentored me. And I think we all owe that to people who come to us and ask, or if we even see that opportunity, because that's how we all get better. And Stan eventually passed me on to a guy named Franklin Heller, who had been a literary agent, and Franklin Heller came out of retirement to represent me. And he walked me through 5 drafts of 2 novels, and we sold the 5th draft of the 2nd novel, and that was at that 8.5-year mark. But without those 2 men, I never would be sitting up here. I mean, they, for whatever reason, because I've gone back and looked at some of that early work, and it was awful. But for whatever reason, there must have been some glimmer of something in there, and they held my hand and sort of walked me through character development and plot development and learning to accept rejection. And more than anything, learning to accept criticism and work with it, because this is a business that is filled with criticism, and taking it constructively and learning to work with it. I was really blessed by my years as a musician, because I would write these pieces, and they were sort of James Taylor-y kind of sounding songs, and I would write the cello parts, the bass part, the flute part, I would write all our vocal parts. And then 3 months into playing them out in the various places we played, I'd hear how much better the song sounded, and I realized, oh, none of them are writing what I wrote. You know, they'd all changed it to their own way of thinking, and it was a collaborative effort. And I view the writing process as a collaborative effort, and I think it's helped me stay in the business, is that it's, if I'm so bright, then my first draft is the right draft. Well, those are never published. It's usually about the 5th draft of my books that are published. And I know, I mean, I was talking to Reed last night, and we go back a ways, and Reed was saying how his first draft is the draft that gets published, but as he goes along, he rewrites. I do that too, but then when I turn it in, generally my editors have a lot of comments, and I work with those comments. Some of them work, some of them don't, quite frankly, but at least I try, and I go through multiple revisions that way, and at some point there's an acceptable book. They could always be better, I regret to say, but there's an acceptable book out there, and it ends up published, and often to some degree of success, which I'm grateful for.
Now, you collaborate with more than just your editors.
I do. I'll collaborate with about anybody who offers. No, I now also write in the young adult group, or really for younger than that, sort of middle school group, with a guy named Dave Barry, a very successful, in fact, Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, funny guy. If you don't know him, you should look up his work. He's a great guy. And he and I met through being...
Or you can look up their work together.
Yeah. He and I met through being in a band together. We're in a band of authors. I was asked to play bass with this group of authors, and no one knew who it was going to be. And about 3 weeks later, this gal called me back and said, okay, I now know who's in the band. It's Barbara Kingsolver, Amy Tan, Stephen King, Dave Barry, Robert Fulgham, and you. And I about fell out of my chair. And we played this one-night stand, thankfully to a book convention, so we were a success. Because we are awful. And on the way off stage, Steve King leaned over his shoulder and said to me, Ridley, we're not done here. And we've been doing it 18 years now. We've raised $2.5 million for nonprofits, and we're still as bad as we ever were. But through that process, I met the wonderful Dave Barry, and when my daughter asked me, she was 5 years old when she asked me how Peter Pan met Captain Hook. And I went, oh, isn't that interesting? We don't know how he can fly. We don't know why he never grows old. We don't know how or why he would dispose of his shadow. And I decided I might attempt a prequel to Peter Pan. And I mentioned this to Dave Barry at the Miami Book Fair, where I'm going next week, when I was staying with him because of this band. And his eyes kind of went wide, and I said, dude, I kill people for a living. You make booger jokes. Maybe we could both write this prequel to Peter Pan. And he said, I'm in. So now I collaborate with the wonderful Dave Barry, and we've written 5 books in a trilogy.
They weren't very good at math, that's why they write.
About how a boy became Peter Pan, and it's been very successful, and we've had just a terrific time with it. And in fact, Disney Theatrical is opening it as a off-Broadway play on March 9th. So that's